Okay, so what's the deal with Oma Zi-o's timeline? Not too much information is known about it. We just know that Sogo, at the age of 18, snapped, turned evil, killed everybody, and that was the end of that. What is Oma Zi-o? Granted, he's the final antagonist slash protagonist of all time, but there's just a few complications with the timeline overlap, because they should be one-to-one, but we have a few issues. So, Tsukasa was there during the bus trip. I'm assuming this because, well, he's there during the bus trip, and I don't really believe that it could have been anyone else, because usually if Tsukasa goes into a world, he takes on the role he's destined to be at that leads him to the situation. This is no different. The problem is Tsukiyomi. If the original timeline played out normally, then Tsukasa saw everything that happened that day. Meanwhile, Tsukiyomi, well, she kind of intruded on the timeline. Does this make a separate timeline? Well, yes, and also it makes a third timeline in a weird sense. You see, Kamen Rider Build was able to fuck over space-time because the Pandora box got rid of pretty much all sense of reason when it came down to actual quantum physics. It allowed you to manipulate them freely without any real care in the world. Hence why Evol in all of his different forms, specifically Black Hole and Evolved Alien, they can manipulate black holes to where they don't function like real black holes. Realistically, a black hole would have just eaten the entirety of the planet in about one episode's time length, maybe shorter, like 10 minutes of it would probably be everything gone. But within this timeline, we don't really have that kind of crush. You could say that the Ride Watches may have something to do with it, but outside of being collectible devices that give him armor and the original sort of plot with them, erasing time, they are not really brought up in any useful way at all afterwards later. It's just basically rider keys. Here's my power, save the world or something. You have my blessing as my new king. So I'm discounting them for now. They do have a semblance of effect because the apocalypse was started due to the Ride Watch's existence, but it's also due to Schwartz's existence. You see where this is getting kind of fumbled? But let's stay on track. Oma Zi-o had to have not had his uncle. So, something must have happened to his uncle early on, prior to, or maybe even after, the whole hospital incident with the bus. Remember, pretty much all the adults were killed. I'm pretty sure only the children survived. And if Sogo had his uncle, but his uncle was later struck down by an illness, this would make sense, because then Sogo would end up in maybe foster care or something with not the best qualities for someone who wishes to be king. That being said, well, what happened next? Oma Zi-o is not insinuously evil. He's just evil. He's not going around killing people because he thinks it's funny. He pretty much got rid of half the population or something like that, probably in an effort to, one, keep his rule under control. I mean, half the population most likely included other emperors and rulers around that time, presidents and such, and not to mention military forces and all that other stuff. Remember, this is Oma Zi-o we're talking about, not normal Zi-o. The only thing is we don't really know exactly what the trigger was. Did he kill all of the original 19 riders and steal their powers? Did he earn the powers like normal? There's a lot of mystery behind it. The best and most clearest example is original Decade, but as Oma Zi-o. He grew up with pretty much nothing but his uncle. His uncle died, sort of in the same vein of how Decade left his sister through one of the Oro veils. Then, most likely, not a good time within the orphanage where he was staying or whatnot, somehow met Waz, a member of Quartzer, got the Zi-o driver, became Zi-o, and then, most obviously, fought the other riders, stole the Ride Watches after destroying or defeating them. Because remember, you can't just hold a Ride Watch up to somebody in order to take their powers. So, most likely he took a more Time Jacker-esque way of getting the powers. Afterwards, he would then become Oma Zi-o at 2018 and circa everything else that we know up until, Gates and Tsukiyomi went back in time. The reason that this is the clearest and best timeline for Oma Zi-o is because it perfectly explains everything. There's no Tsukiyomi and Gates involvement. Waz as his herald makes a lot more sense if it was just Waz there. And remember, Quartz sent Waz specifically. Likewise, this would also explain why he has no form of compassion. His uncle died not too long, or maybe a small amount, maybe let's say a year after his parents died. He can't have his uncle or his parent. Well, his parents' death are kind of necessary for any of this to happen, but his uncle's death, it had to have happened. I cannot confirm or state that yes, it most definitely happened. When it happened, can't really say, but it definitely had to have happened, because there's no way in any manageable sense that he could be that much of a tyrant while he has his uncle. He had to have lost him at some point. Maybe it was after he turned 18, because that's when the whole time stream started to fuck over in 2019, so perhaps that's probably why. If that's the case, then it makes even more sense. Because remember how ballistic he went when he lost Gates and Tsukiyomi. Now imagine if that was his uncle instead, in their places. It wasn't sports, it was just the monsters from throughout the writer history. He would have went probably 10 times more ballistic, destroyed all of them, and then continued on his reign as Oma Zi-o. That's the clearest timeline we got. Because when Schwartz enters the fray, and all this other stuff with Alpina, it muddies the water greatly. But there's one other interesting thing. Oma Zi-o might be undestroyable. As long as Oma Zi-o exists, there will probably be a small hint of evil in Sogo, maybe a bit of malice or something. But also, Oma Zi-o has some weird standing powers. To be able to still exist after your timeline is gone, that is some interesting shit right off of its back. And unfortunately, because of him doing that, he kind of slightly undid what Sogo did. Because Timejackers got their memory back slowly but certainly. Or may have died, but he probably will come back randomly. They always seem to do. Let's not forget that Waz still remembers everything. Tsukasa's dead, for now. As long as people remember Decade, he'll come back to life. And I'm telling you, not all his companions are dead, because Daki's still alive. That's the best I can do. I'm just trying to piece together a timeline that we weren't even able to see. So, there you have it. And the timeline stuff is actually, ironically, not that confusing until you add the universal aspects to it. When you bring the AR worlds into it, that's where shit starts to get funny. But other than that, that's about it. And that's the clearest timeline I got for Oma Zi-o in any capacity. If you could come up with something better, let me know in the comments below, because I don't think it gets much clearer than that. I mean, it could, but I don't know. Alright, that's about it. See ya.